We've come to the last session of the festival. It's called Crime Clues, Writing a Bestseller. What makes a crime novel impossible to put down?
Thank you all for being here. So, just to begin with, crime fiction is really just one of the most enduring popular genres across the world. And you have so many subgenres, right? You have police procedurals, you have locked room mysteries, you have thrillers. And readers across cultures are drawn to these stories all the time. So, what makes a crime novel work? Is it plot? Is it atmosphere? Is it pacing? Or is it just something elusive? With us is this extremely distinguished panel to discuss all of this from various angles, and I'm really excited to be here with them. So, what I would like to start with is for Karthik and Kanishka and Leodora, because you worked with a publishing house for the longest time, is when you got a proposal for a crime novel, what were those things that you immediately picked up on and you thought, okay, this is a book that will sell? What were the couple of elements that really excited you?
Testing. All right, it's on. I'd say the big thing for me is usually it's the hook that I'd look for. So if the book could be described or it had like a sentence to describe it, really, really short, but really, really punchy, that really arrested me, that made me feel something, that made me curious, and I go, okay, this feels like it's something. So I think a really good example is, I always use it, K.L. Slater's The Marriage, the strapline was, 10 years ago, he killed my son. Today, I married him. Immediately, like, oh my God, I've got to know what that's about. So that's one of my things. I'll let others speak a little bit more.
But given that this genre is fairly new in India, the first thing I look for is whether or not the storyline or the characters are derivative, or whether or not they're inspired from, crime writing and crime writers from the rest of the world. And more importantly, it's something that should have a sort of a page turning quality. It's not just the crime, the protagonist. I mean, I love like damaged protagonists and layered protagonists. It's also what is this story telling you about the world that we live in, through the people and the world that the story is talking about. So there has to be a sort of an element of universality. And then obviously, good writing, it takes a lot of discipline to write good crime novels. And unfortunately, what is happening in India is that publishers, while being open to genre fiction, they are facing a lot of competition from international writers such as yourself. I think you'll become even more popular after you leave. And so many authors don't get a chance to develop their series. I've worked with a lot of crime writers who had ideas for 4 installments, 5 installments, but the publisher said that your first installment did not sell, so maybe you should try like self-help or something. So.
Self-help.
Speaking purely as an editor, I'd say I love terrific beginnings to crime novels. Right. And terrific is obviously a very, very strange word, in the sense it's a very, very ambiguous word. Essentially, the kind of book that literally catches you by the scruff of the neck and says, read me. That is something that always gets me hooked. I believe that a terrific beginning can be really, really good for a crime novel. And that's what I kind of look for always.
Right. Aroon, what are the elements that you try to bring into your books? Is it something that you really watch out for, in the sense, have you read books that earlier on, before you wrote yourself, and you thought, this is what I would like to bring into my books?
So obviously, I grew up on the usual Enid Blytons and Biggles and then Tintin, Asterix, all that. But I'm drawn to a statement made by Conan Doyle. When someone asked him, who do you write the Holmes stories for, the Sherlock Holmes? He, at that time, is supposed to have said, for the man who's half a boy and the boy who's half a man. So I've always kept that in my mind. And I think a good thriller or even a work of crime fiction, rests pretty much on 4 legs. Okay. One is plot, and the plot and pace, I would say, are twin legs. And I think the point made by him is very good. The first 5 pages, in my view, are critical.
Right.
If you get hooked, And the greatest thing that happens to me is occasionally somebody comes and says, you know what, I read this book, I read your book, I couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important hook. So plot, pace. The third is characterization. And the fourth is backdrop. So there's a certain immersive character to the thriller or the crime or detective novel that's vital. So the reader loses himself or herself in the story and the outside world fades. So these four legs are something. The last point I want to make on what the holy grail sometimes is for me, I don't attain it most often, but there is a word that's sometimes used, it's called transcendence. Which is really, I read this novel today, and that happens with Conan Doyle or with Tolkien or with the great fantasy novels or crime novels. You'll go back to it after 10 years. You'll go back to it every 3 years. You know, I've got to pull that book out and just read it again. So I'd say transcendence, because of its certain universal appeal, is also important. So these are considerations I keep in mind, writing for myself and also writing obviously for the reader who's half a teen and the teen who's half an adult. Yeah.
Would you like to add something? But
I was only really agreeing. I feel like you've briefly summarized all of the conversations I would have had with my authors back at Hachette, so that's incredible. Yeah, perfectly said.
But as a writer as well, did you decide to put some elements in there? Were you very keen on writing a specific kind of novel?
For sure. There are certainly lessons that I've explored with my authors that I thought were important. So, for example, stakes in every chapter. That doesn't have to be life or death, but, you know, what does this character want? What do they need? How are those two things different? And then what are the things that are stopping them from getting that? That has to be present in every chapter, because then you have conflict. You have conflict, then you've got that tension. Right. And tension for me is vital when it comes to crime, thriller, suspense, anything in that kind of bracket. But at the same time, and I'm slightly repeating myself here because I've said this a few times, I think as any kind of writer, it's super important to know the rules, to know what makes a crime book a perfect crime book, and then decide which rules you want to break, right? So having seen a lot of tropes explored, a lot of conventions used, it was great for me to have that knowledge to go, okay, this is where I want to be different. Right. For example, there are loads of really confident female serial killers at the moment, particularly in the UK and the US and our media. And I kind of wanted to do something a bit different to that. You know, what about a female serial killer who's terrified of killing people? That's different. That's interesting.
No, it's excellent.
So, you know, like crime writing has evolved in a very big way in the last decade or so. We have now some very good crime novels. Like, I mean, Unmana from Bangalore, she did this book called Chikkamma Tours. Very fascinating setting, very interesting detective. Then many years ago, the journalist Aditya Sinha wrote a book, The CEO Who Lost His Head. It was also blending crime with humor. It was set in a newsroom, and the CEO of the newsroom is murdered, and then these two very funny characters, they decide to investigate the case. My point is that we don't have validation mechanisms in India, so it's very difficult to discover these books and recommend them to readers. Like in the West, for instance, LitHub has a separate section, where they are recommending crime writing. The New York Times, they have a separate section, review section for crime writing. We don't have that in India. So how do we make these voices heard? So I mean, I think this is one problem with crime writing. And publishers have tried a lot. In fact, HarperCollins India set up an imprint called Harper Black. It was devoted exclusively to crime writing, both like contemporary, historical crime. And they are still running it. And when Juggernaut was set up, one of Chiki's mandate to her editor, senior editor, was that you have to discover the next big crime writer in India. So publishers keep trying, but how do we make these voices amplify? How do we take them to the readers?
I mean, I would look at it this way. Indian crime writing is awaiting its Bahubali moment. Right? Let me explain. For long, South Indian films were South Indian films. The Indian film industry was only the Hindi film industry. And then suddenly Bahubali broke through, and then it became this pan-Indian film, even though it was shot originally in Telugu. And now you have And since it's been what, 10, 15
broken
years
through.
since that?
Publishing is awaiting its
You
Bahubali.
in general, that's true.
No, I think publishing has had its many Bahubali. Different, for instance, lit fiction had it many years ago.
Yeah.
And that's
Or,
another reason,
non-fiction had
why
it.
why lit fiction, because it has always been like privileged over
Yeah.
crime writing. If you look at the list of speakers at Lit Fest, and I mean to say like the really like tier one established Lit Fest, where you have the Nobel laureate or the Booker winners of that year attending the festival, you don't see too many crime writers, who get invited. I mean, this is a crime writers festival, so
Great,
yeah, which is much needed. And we used to have there was a attempt at doing like a crime writing festival a few years ago, and then it stopped. But we don't give that importance. We don't give that heft to writers writing in the genre. And this not only applies to crime writing; it applies to genre fiction.
Right.
Science fiction, fantasy. I mean, we have so many science fiction and fantasy writers in India and the subcontinent who have made, waves globally. One of them is sitting here, Lavanya Lakshmi Narayan, who was shortlisted for the Arthur C. Clarke Award. This year, or maybe it was the end of last year, Rudranil Sen Gupta wrote a novel called The Beast Within. I mean, I'm really surprised that it hasn't got the kind of attention it deserved, despite the good reviews. So how do
No, but so taking off from what you said about discoverability, I think this is something that we're constantly having conversations about, right, as writers and publishers, is increasingly, I think there is an onus on the authors to market their books. And I'm just wondering how everyone feels about that, because you could have a brilliant book, but if it's written by somebody who is reclusive or who doesn't want to be online, is that book going to sell? What do you think about that, Aroon? How comfortable are you actually pushing the book? Or
I'm actually very bad at it. I must be very frank. So this has been a challenge, partly because I'm not a big social media guy.
Right.
Everybody, those days, when my first book came out and subsequently they said, where is your Facebook page and this and that. I struggled with a lot of that. I was also full-time running my own businesses,
Right.
which were growing. It was a part-time thing. So I was very challenged. So by the time my third book came out, they said, look, you got to do something, man. I mean, you can't just sit back
Right.
and, the publishers anyway have their own problems. Hundreds of books out a year. They're not going to focus on yours. So somebody said, I've got this brainwave. You got to make the book into a film.
Oh.
So I went around, made some very strange Bollywood connections, and they said, we'll get you onto the screen. That was when the streaming was taking off.
Right.
So Z5, the streaming platform, bought my rights for some nonsense, what I thought was a very high price. I quoted some, they didn't even bargain. It turned out that the owner of Z, Mr. Subhash Chandra, was selling his company to Sony.
Okay.
So he was loading content. So the film people came and met me and said, look, we've got to make an 8-part film series out of your book Skyfire, but we've got 3 months to do it. How does that even work? But I said, look, I'm available for a screen role as a hero. So at very low cost. So in fact, it turned out that Bobby Deol was supposed to play the lead, but he had an injury, so they got this chap, youngster, Pratik Babbar.
Okay.
So he was cast. So I had all these. They called me for that start thing. I went there, and I said, I'm going to somehow get into this. It's my break. So I go there, and then there is Pratik Babbar and all these younger stars. So I'm hoping that I'll get some role. So they all went around me and said, Uncle Ji, namaskar. So that's when I knew it wasn't going to happen. But I can also tell you that was a dud.
Right.
They made the film.
It didn't
3
it didn't
months. I mean,
affect-
what film can you make? It's a mess. So it didn't do well, and I don't think that helped the book also. People said,
Right.
we've seen the movie, no way we're touching the book. So all I'm saying is that I think, frankly, Kanishka and these guys know more about how to market it. I'm not going to venture there because I hope over time there's a long tail, people read, word of
Right.
mouth.
Yeah.
But I think it's an antiquated view. I think one has to get a little bit more aggressive in marketing. That's my view. But I'm not there yet.
There is pressure on agents to get the authors to be open to doing doing publicity, even sometimes even invest in publicity. But any good serious editor is not going to take on a work of fiction even if it comes with like a solid marketing plan, or even like, like an assurance that some copies will be bought back. I pitched a historical fiction to you recently, and the author said he's going to invest 4 lakhs in marketing, and you rejected it despite that. So this is what I mean about fiction. But non-fiction, yes, the influence, influence and your following and your captive audience. If you have a very popular YouTube channel or Instagram handle, that helps. But I don't think it helps with fiction. What it does is that if an editor really likes the book, and if he or she is facing opposition from their team, because like a decision to acquire a book is taken collectively, by a publishing house, and a lot of the decision makers are not really readers, but they know what is working in the market. It helps them get those through. Again, this happened with that Dead Again. What was the name of the book?
The Dead Know
Kishore,
Nothing.
sorry, Dead Know Nothing.
It's a great book.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I think certainly within the UK market for non-fiction, it's pretty much almost impossible to get a deal without a platform. But I would say in the fiction space, it can be helpful. One of the authors I worked with was Geneva Rose. She's got 1 million followers across platforms, and that really has taken her career to another level. When we think about authors like Rebecca Yarros, who are massive on TikTok, she's got hundreds of thousands, quite a lot in the romantasy space. But at the same time, editors are looking for originality. They're looking for stories that are going to create buzz because of the merit of their work. If we think about things like A Little Life, that blew up recently on social media because it's making people feel so much. I think it's really interesting how TikTok has changed book marketing on a Western global scale, because if something does resonate with an audience, it can then create a massive opportunity.
Word of mouth.
But you don't have to necessarily have the platform in the first instance in order for that to happen. Yeah. So a bit of a mixed message.
I have one more thing to say, and I don't think it applies to all of you here. All of you here at a crime writing festival. So obviously all of you are reading crime fiction for pleasure. I think this great, you should read for, self-help because you want to become a better person. I think that constitutes a large part of the Indian English audience, And so even Agatha Christie will fall into that. If you read Agatha Christie, you'll improve your English, right? So then how does an Indian author fit in that kind of thing, right? Number one, if it's a crime fiction book, reading for pleasure. And then since he or she doesn't have a British name, it's not improving your English either. I think we are up against that kind of thing. And unless that changes, we'll continue to struggle.
Right. So, that brings me to this point about word of mouth and how some books somehow travel, right? Globally. We've seen how incredibly popular Japanese crime has become. Before that, it was Scandinavian noir. Suddenly, everybody was reading that girl with a tattoo, dragon tattoo. Yeah, right? And or even Alexander McCall Smith's, that his series set in Botswana, and that was so popular. And I wonder, what do you think of that? Like, why these certain books travel, crime books travel, and also why perhaps we haven't had such a huge breakthrough with an Indian franchise. What do you think, Kanishka?
No, I think those books travel globally because they are already made a lot of buzz in those markets. Anything which becomes big in the UK, US, and I just don't mean crime writing, but even if it's a literary fiction, it's going to get picked up in India. I mean, this is why the Booker Prize and International Booker Prize has this sort of a sway over Indian readership, and whether or not an Indian is on the long list, short list, or Indian is winning. But I think it's a kind of a universality of the book, that it speaks to everyone despite being rooted in a specific society, specific world. So I think that is something that really appeals to readers. I mean, they connect with the characters, and they get to learn so much about a different foreign landscape for foreign people. In India, I mean, in the last few years, there have been a lot of writers who've got deals overseas, like Meeti Shroff Shah, most of her novels are set in, Pali Hill, and it's in the elite Gujarati community, featuring, a detective who's solving crimes in the backdrop of, astrology, matchmaking. And she got published in the UK, and she's been shortlisted for the Dagger a few times, but I don't see that that kind of acclaim traveling back to India. She's become popular in the UK. She's been translated into Japanese. But I think one of the reasons why the book got picked up in the UK in the first place is because of the rootedness, and of the story, which appealed to a lot of readers. So I think it's a universal connect. I mean, how do you, this applies to every good, book, every good genre.
Add to what I completely agree with what Kanishka said. So I think this traveling back into India, and it's not just novels necessarily set in an Indian milieu. I mean, if you look at some of the big Western thriller writers or even detective fiction writers who've become bestsellers in their own way, even in the Indian market. So I think it's something I feel resonated with me a few years ago. So my fourth book is all set in New York, peopled by American characters. I'm trying to crack that market, and maybe it'll wend its way back here. But I think the larger point, I don't know whether I'm exaggerating this, but in India, the readership, particularly in the younger demographic, exists. Obviously, there are a lot of readers, both in above 40 and below 40. But I get the sense increasingly that the younger Indian readers' mind space is very, very divided now. I mean, at least it's the gut feel I get. I don't know. They're a lot on mobile phones, they are on news, they are on film, videos, YouTube. It all takes time during the day. So, do you really have a big, growing reading audience in India? I think the answer is yes. Certainly, we see some of the mythological thriller genre doing extremely well. There are others doing well. But I don't know. I think these folks might know much better. There's a gut feel I get that it's harder to crack that than to try and crack a market like England or the United States. But that's just I don't know whether I'm right in saying
I
that.
think the main issue is that the readership is not growing. It's not as if sales are going down, but the readership has been stagnant, and it's not kind of commensurate with all the buzz and the hype and all the festivals and all the pitching contests. So how do we find a readership of like 20 or 30,000 copies for a homegrown crime novel? I don't think we have a single work of fiction in this genre in India in the last maybe 20 years that has sold more than 10,000 copies. Correct me, as a standalone book. I'm not talking about a series of books. On the other hand, non-fiction has done really well. I mean, Aviruk Sen's book on the Arushi murder mystery, murder sold like more than 60 or 70,000 copies. Hussain Dedi sells a lot. I mean, Dongri to Dubai sold over 2 lakh copies. But in fiction, it's a problem. And this, all the subgenres of crime writing, whether it's contemporary, whether it's historical, whether it's serial, cozy crime, serial killer. So, I mean, I think the main reason is that we don't have influencers who can just say, pick up this book and like the very next day it's number in the top 100 on Amazon. We don't have that.
I wonder if our film industry feeds our need for crime
It
fiction.
does that, and also like this books to film doesn't always convert
turn
into
out well for the
big
book.
sales. No, it happened like it happened in a big way for Sacred Games, which was already a big bestseller. It happened in a big way for Harinder Sikka's
Calling Sehmat.
Calling Sehmat, which was originally published by a non-fiction publisher called Konark Books, and then when Harinder got a film deal, he approached Penguin. They re-edited the book, and it was published as, Calling Sehmat
Calling
only.
Sehmat.
And the film was called Razi, and it's like sold like 150,000 copies after that. But this didn't happen for Arvind Adiga's, not White Tiger, the other one, the one that is set in the world of cricket film. Yeah, I don't remember the name of the. Yeah, exactly. So it's a hit and miss. You can never rely on a film adaptation. Like increasing the sales for the book. Yeah.
So, given what you said about the way younger people are reading, and just like, and all of us are hugely distracted, right? We've got so much stuff going on. You've got also OTT, you've got podcasts. Is this something that you keep in mind either when commissioning or when you're writing? Do you need to keep your books? Are you thinking I need to keep this book shorter? I need to pace it in a particular way. How are you coping with the fact that people's attention spans have changed? And also, how do you sustain suspense over such a long period of time, over your...
There are some things that, have worked for years and still continue to work on that front. So sometimes when it comes to the structure of the novel, it's trying to keep your chapters really tight and in bite-sized chunks. So you might have more chapters in the book overall, but your word count is still, let's say, 80,000 words. And it gives the reader that feeling of, oh, just one more chapter, or I'm burning through this really quickly. So that's a small strategic thing that can be done. But I also think knowing your audience when it comes to the book that you're selling, because not every reader wants, I'm just going to read this in one night, housemaid kind of story. But if you're trying to talk to a younger audience that's on TikTok, it's thinking about your marketing, thinking about who you can have shouting about the book on social media to connect with those readers who are looking for their recommendations in that way, because the way people search for books has changed so much. So those are just two things, but I don't want to take up too much time because I'm sure these gentlemen have other things to add. It's an interesting question.
So I think I'm not so hung up on the size of the novel. Sometimes I have found that even the thick books attract a lot, because as long as you're holding the reader tightly to the written page and they want to keep reading, quite often readers have told me, and I also feel, hey, I've still got half the book to go, lucky. Because it's meaty, the story is running, I'm hooked onto it. A very good example, it's not in this genre, but it's, for example, James Clavell's Shogun. You get into it, it's a period piece, it's a very fat book, but you're very happy for it to be fat. It goes on, and some people have said about it because many people have said about it for Lord of the Rings in its own way. So I think that's not really the challenge. It's what your sense is of how immersive and thrilling the book is, even if it's a whodunit. So I think that should guide the size. Obviously, too fat a book, I don't know about the economics and other things start coming in. The book becomes very expensive. Yeah, the pricing, I think that's a slightly trickier point. I don't get into it. But really, I think I try not to, obviously it's not huge, but it shouldn't be too much of a challenge within a certain, perhaps,
I think a
size.
beautiful word you just used was immersive, because I do think if a story is really immersive, then it can be over 100,000 words. It can be even 200,000 words long. I think it's more of a challenge, actually, for contemporary crime writers to get away with it. I think historical crime writers, historical fiction writers, fantasy writers for sure. Oh, I've read some fantasy books that are about 400,000 words long. I enjoyed it, but that's a long book. But readers come to expect a certain length, and I think readers can be more critical of contemporary crime thriller writers if it's going to be over 100,000 words long. So I absolutely agree. I think there is a challenge for a writer if they're going to push beyond a word count to make sure that every word feels like it was, needed. Yeah.
No, I mean, speaking as an editor, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, speaking as a reader, I think thick books are fine, and as long as they're done well and everything. Speaking purely as an editor, speaking specifically about the Indian crime writing scenario, when you don't have established writers, I find myself thinking this book should be not very thick, because then it'll be priced right, and then because you have an attractive cover or the blurb is well written, a person will buy it on impulse, right? So that is a thought that occurs, right? If we have an established writer, that thought is going to go away, I think, in my head. But at this point of time, this is very much a thought in my head. It should be short because it will be priced right, and then therefore amenable to impulse purchase.
So, my decision to represent or not represent a work of fiction in the genre, or to edit or not, is not dictated by market forces. We are in a very, very price-sensitive market. The paper costs have gone up. The publishers have to bear the GST on the advance and the royalties. So a book that was priced $3.99 a few years ago would now be priced at like $5.99. So now all the paperbacks are priced at hardback prices. So we look at So I'm not really concerned about the length of the manuscript as long as it works. If it's overwritten, if it's over descriptive, then we give edits to the authors. But yes, many a times, and Deepthi, perhaps you can talk about your experience with Riva Razdan's Death of a Gentleman, which is a crime, like a novel, and which was represented by me, and you asked her to cut it down. Uh, yeah, so yeah, if the publisher makes a sort of provisional offer, I mean, if like based on author's willingness to edit down the manuscript, we take it back. We take the suggestion back to the author. And sometimes the authors agree, sometimes they don't agree. But we, at the agenting representation level, we don't tell the author, oh, just resubmit the manuscript to us after chopping off like 50,000 words.
I mean, it wasn't a random cut. It was like, it was flat. Yeah, no. I'm just saying that it is obviously dictated by the fact that this book could work better with 10,000 words less. And it was like 100,000 words, and it didn't need to be. And I think it did serve the plot better.
I think often it does, because again, when it comes to crime, thriller, mystery, there's usually a question mark that you're hanging over the reader's head where they want to get to the answer. So if you're delaying them getting to the answer and it feels like they could be getting there faster, that's going to really tick them off. So yeah, I think a lot of the time, as an editor, I do spend a lot of time cutting my author's books down or saying, come back to me with 20,000 words less. Sometimes it's warranted that it can be longer, but a lot of the time, yeah, it needs to be more lean.
I have a question for you. So there are like 2 or 3 writers of Indian, South Asian origin who have become really big in the crime writing space. I'm Abir Mukherjee, Wasim
Yes.
Khan. They're like
His book
Sunday
was
Times
Crime
bestseller.
Book of the Year
Why
last
are they
year.
not popular in India? Is it because their books are not published in India?
I think as
Like Abir is so popular that his books are being translated into Bangla and other languages. But why is he not a household name?
yeah,
in
I mean,
India?
both Abir and Vas are great, and I know them both. But I don't think I can answer why they're not popular here. You might be better placed to know.
Is it because the books are distributed in India as opposed to being published and priced higher? And,
Maybe. It's definitely something that I've noticed is when, at least in the UK publishing, it's when a book is published and it's originated elsewhere, it's sometimes difficult to get the strategy feeling as cohesive or as targeted as it needs to be in order for it to work in the territory where there's a lot of potential, because it can feel like an afterthought, right? For their publishers, their big focus is getting it to #1 or whatever it is in the UK. And so the strategy isn't always there when it comes to other territories, which are really lucrative. I mean, I've had so many conversations about this. I think sometimes Western publishing can be very insular and looking like it's just the UK or it's just the US and maybe Australia and Ireland. But there's so many readers globally, and publishers, the way it works, often we own a lot of territories in other countries where there's more to be done, more to be utilized. So I appreciate that's a bit of a washy answer, but I think it's a lack of focus. I'm sorry, publishers.
Okay, so just aside from all of that, what is the one trope in crime fiction or nonfiction fiction really, that you wish would just die? You're done with that trope in crime fiction. Who first?
I mean, it feels like a bit of a cop-out to say this, but I honestly, there isn't one for me. There are things that happen a lot. Like I got a bit sick of seeing cozy crime in my inbox. I got a bit sick of seeing some really poorly thought out police procedurals, but I don't think there's any trope that needs to die if you're doing it in a way that feels fresh, right? I think actually some of the best fiction is a fiction that's taking a trope and it's making it feel really new. It's bringing something really exciting to it. That's, feed me that all day. So I've copped out a little bit, but if anyone does have...
I've also got to cop out of that. But overall, I'd say in recent times, certainly detective fiction and the main protagonist, I think there's a tendency to make them very tortured human beings.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big trope. So
often alcoholic.
They've got layers on layers on layers. They've got alcoholism. They've got all sorts of issues. I said, for God's sake, does it have to be so complicated? So that's something I think we could do a little bit less of. But that's just my view.
My first reaction is the same. But then every now and then there is a good tortured detective. And then so I find myself second guessing. Yeah. So I think the point is not, I don't think the tortured detective is the problem. Like, why is he tortured? Is there good reason for him or her to be tortured? I think that is important.
I would like it to be more ambiguous, like life itself. I mean, I would not like fiction to have neat endings. I mean, it can be left open-ended. So I think it's more nuance and layering, especially when it comes to crime writing from the subcontinent. So that's what I would like in crime writing. It should read like the best literary fiction. I mean, you should not make any distinction between crime fiction and good literary fiction.
I find, Kanishka, you mentioned about, when you're looking at proposals, and the ones that attract you are books that are telling you about the world. And I think that's so true of crime fiction, right? It is really prescient. You've written about climate warfare, and you write about identity, and these are really important things. And I think that crime fiction, and people can be quite dismissive of it, right? And I wonder why that is, and yet they keep reading it. Why do you think that is, this sort of...
I think there can be a bit of snobbery in the fiction world, right? I think literary fiction is often hailed as being more worthy because it's really hard to write a beautiful sentence. And it is really hard to write a beautiful sentence. But it's also really hard to write a really cracking plot.
Right.
And I think that gets lost in the mix sometimes. There's a perception that writing a book that's really, truly gripping and entertaining and a great story is much easier or less worthy. And I think a lot of the way that we speak about fiction, the way that we review it, the places that certain genres get in, whether it's newspaper articles or literary festivals, that embeds that outlook. But I'd say, they're two different disciplines, but equally as important. Don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Just look at the kind of material we have for crime writers and novels and non-fiction in India, and it's not as if it's not being mined by writers who are interested in the genre. It's just that they are not sufficiently motivated. And I keep coming back to the point about not having people who are championing these genres. So I think it all boils down to that. I mean, it'll take me a few days, but I can prepare a list of like 30 or 40 crime novels, many of them represented by me, many of them represented by others, that should have got acclaim in India, and some of them should have traveled to the West, but it all boils down to who gets the eyeballs.
I think the snobbery associated with lit fiction and crime being something you do for time pass, as they say in India. I think that is at the heart of it. In fact, I mean, books that actually merge literary fiction themes along with crime, I think those writers are doing a fantastic job.
Stunning,
Because they're giving you the thrill of
yes,
genre
Nilanjana
fiction at the same
Roy's
time.
book, Black
They're
Book,
also staying within. They're also
Yes.
talking about other things, not just the crime.
Right.
Your book, for instance.
I didn't pay him to say that.
So I'm just doing a little segue away from
Sure.
this, because I think sometimes in the audience, people say, this whole process of writing a thriller, writing a crime novel or a detective novel, sometimes feels difficult. Are we getting it right? Are we not getting it right? And I think those are very valid questions, particularly for first-time writers who want to break into this. But one thing, I know it's not come up in the panel directly, but I think I should share is that actually you should treat writing your novel as an adventure in itself. There should be a lot of excitement in you.
Yeah.
You're not just, trying to figure out how many copies it's going to sell, what's going to
Right.
happen. The writing becomes quite tortuous at that time. But I can say from my own experience, I tend to write a lot by going out into the field. So my latest novel I pound the streets, I meet all sorts of interesting people. My first book came out when Bin Laden was assassinated. And at that time, I wanted Indian intelligence information, and my uncle was in national security. I met a gentleman who was supposed to be high in Indian intelligence. He insisted on meeting me only in Chandni Chowk, in a small, like an eatery. And so I went to meet him there. Amazing guy, but that was when Soviet Union was collapsing. India had its own challenges.
Right.
And he was much before my book, but he was shuttling between Moscow and Delhi, trying to sort out things. So I was talking to him. Finally, he said, "Are you going to publish your novel?" I said, "At some point it will happen." But I said, "It's very difficult to publish." He said, "Aap aisa karo, you go to Ajmer Dargah." and all things will happen. So I said, what does it mean? So I had my agent and things were happening, but just before my manuscript was ready and people were saying it's going to take time, I happened to be near Ajmer. I went to the dargah just like that. And without anything, I just prayed my respects to the saint. I came out. I didn't even make a wish. But 5 minutes after I came out of the dargah, I get a call from the agent saying you've just been accepted by Bangalore.
Amazing.
That's just one example. But there are hundreds of stories around this when writing, which I think, end of the day, in some form. So in my first book, this meeting in Chandni Chowk, one of the protagonists, the Pakistani spy, we meet there. Yeah, like that.
Right.
So I think you must have a lot of fun writing your book, and then I think the book will work itself. Yeah.
It's actually not bad advice. I often get, prospective writers saying, oh, this trend's really popular. Shall I write this? Da, 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 da. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, if you really love that trend so much, that's all you read and that's all you can dream about, then sure, write it. But first and foremost, by the time the book actually gets published, these things take months, sometimes years.
Yes.
That might not even be popular anymore. You might not make any money off it. But also, you have to... You'll write your first draft, your agent will go through it, you'll do some edits, your editor will then get their hands on it, you do your structural edit, so you're looking at big picture stuff, and you do your line edit, then you do your copy. You have to look at that book so many times.
Right.
So if you don't love it, if you're writing about something that you don't care about, you don't truly enjoy, or you're not passionate about, that's going to be so torturous. It's just not worth it,
No,
and it won't feel worth it.
Yeah, and I really do think that readers can sort of sniff that out, that inauthenticity. I don't want to say that word, but yeah. But just for like aspiring writers out there, Aroon has given some advice. But what advice would you give Karthik and Kanishka and Leo? Just like for aspiring writers, what is one thing that they should probably think about before starting to write a crime novel?
I think this advice is not only restricted to crime writing, but fiction in general. That like great fiction writing skills cannot be taught. You can be you can learn discipline. You can learn craft. By reading a lot of books, by attending workshops, doing your MFAs and all. But you need to have some sort of talent, and you need to be curious about the world when you're talking about this genre in particular. Read a lot of books in the genre, and it has to have that authenticity of a lived experience, even if you haven't done that. So it has to be very well researched. But again, fiction cannot be taught. So my advice may not work in the long run, because you need to have basic skill sets to write fiction.
I definitely think the advice to read a lot is perfect advice. And I've not met, well, okay, maybe I'm now generalizing here, but I've certainly not met a writer who reads loads who isn't a good writer. Similarly with editors, actually. The best editors I've ever met are the ones who read the most voraciously, again, having a passion for the craft and really just exploring it and discovering other stories will make you a better storyteller yourself. It's probably the number one bit of advice I'd give. And just from a slightly more practical standpoint, I think whether you're writing something that you see as more literary or commercial, it's a good idea to have a sense of 3 or 4 authors who are currently out there, whose careers and whose work you'd admire. So you've got an idea of what to aim for, right? So that when you're talking about your book, you're trying to sell it to someone, you know how to talk about it in a way that makes it feel like something they can then go on to sell if they're an agent or a publisher. It really does help, yeah.
I'd say when you're actually doing the writing of the book, stop thinking of the future. Write. Focus on your writing, think about your stories, think about your character, forget about what's going to follow. And you actually don't know what's going to follow. Is your book going to be published? Nobody knows, right? So write because you want to write, because you have a story to tell, because you have something you think you want to share with the world. I want to write a literary fiction novel. Stop slotting yourself. Just write your story. Feel free to take the story wherever you want to take it. Understand that writing is a long process. You're going to write, you're going to edit, you're going to rewrite. Understand that that's just the way it is, right? So don't be in a hurry, don't be impatient, don't be restless. Take your time with everything and then get into it.
It's really good advice. Naturally, finish what you're saying.
It calls for commitment, it calls for some amount of self-belief, and it calls for definitely some amount of luck. But believe that I think you can have all three.
It just reminds me of what you were saying. There are so many writers I've met who've gotten stuck or never finished a book because they are so worried about what people are going to think when they finish it, or what the reception's going to be like, or what's going to happen to it. So yeah, the more you can just forget about that when you're writing and literally just write, the better. Don't edit. Don't stop to edit. That will kill you. Wait until you've got the first draft down.
I think it's also very important for first-time writers or new writers not to share their manuscripts with the world before they actually share it with the world, because that's a very big mistake writers make, because they are so anxious. Yeah, they are so nervous. They keep sharing drafts, with friends and family, and sometimes like people who are in publishing, and that's a big mistake they're making, because they keep getting conflicting feedback, and then they end up using portions from varying conflicting feedback from multiple people, and it becomes very, very difficult for them to have that level of confidence going forward. So trust yourself, work on the draft a few times, and then you must have your like a small group of beta readers whom you trust. They need not be people from publishing or writers. They can be voracious readers. But they have to be honest. Yeah, honest, of course.
Well, the tortured detective, I think, is the product of a tortured writer. So don't be that tortured writer. Then you'll spare us the tortured detective.
Just an added point which I liked is that if the research is deep, that helps a lot. I think that, of course, you shouldn't, make it overtly researched in the book, but it should flow effortlessly. A very good example of that kind of writing is Robert Harris. If you read Fatherland or A Soldier and a Spy, research is incredibly deep, but it comes in the novel lightly. So it creates the whole world. If you read Fatherland, and particularly, riveting. But it's just created. But you can feel that there is very deep research. And I think that makes a terrific difference in creating this atmosphere in the novel.
Brilliantly said. I always try and describe it as like an iceberg, right? It's really great to do like really, really deep research, and then the reader only sees like a bit of it, but it means it feels so rich. And yeah.
I think we can open it up for audience questions now. Yeah. Are there any questions or? Oh, okay.
Loads.
Is there someone with a mic?
One mic.
Thank you.
Actually, a couple of questions you answered, especially Kanishka. I have shared my manuscript with too many people, and I'm like, I don't want the book out at all because I'm so confused. When I've been looking at sending in publishing proposals and all, there's a lot of information as to how to do it for international publishing, but there's not really much of advice on how to do it for Indian publishers, or how do you, is the proposal, how do you do the proposal? Is it different, or is it the same kind of?
No, when I started out as an agent, this was like 18 years ago, there were hardly any resources for first-time writers. Now things have changed. I mean, if you just go on the Himalayan Writers Retreat website, not only do they have pages and pages on how to pitch to a publisher, broken down by genre, but they also they have a list of database of freelance editors you can reach out to if you want any help, and a database of editors, database of agents. So I don't agree. I think in the US, there is way too emphasis on preparing the right query letter, like you
Right.
spend hours and hours
Right.
and weeks and months on query letters. But I mean, as long as the query letter is compelling enough, even if it's not brilliant, I'm definitely going to read the manuscript. So I think it works differently. But I mean, there are resources, and in fact, because of so many lit fests, now you have access to, editors, publishers, agents. Uh, I mean, you can meet them at JLF, you can meet them at the Lit Mart, at the Bangalore Lit Fest, and it's quite democratic now, as opposed to many years ago when you just had those generic email IDs on the website of the publishers, and you
Yeah.
used to send hard copies,
Right.
and then a few weeks later they used to return it with the rejection note. So
That said, I'd say some persistence will help.
Yeah.
Editors always have far too many manuscripts to
Right.
read,
Right.
and we are always months behind.
Right.
So some persistence would help. I'm not saying this proudly. I'm saying this, as a matter of fact.
Right.
This
Thank you.
happens with agented submissions also. Sometimes publishers take like 6 or 8 months or 10 months to get back on something. And they've been sitting on it for that long, and then they'll just remember the manuscript and they'll read it overnight, and then they say, okay, we are interested in doing this if the rights are available.
The light bulb comes on in the editor's mind.
At my agency, sometimes we don't get back to author despite showing interest, like initial interest in their proposals, is because we are conflicted about the book. I mean, because I take feedback from multiple people, then I take a call, and sometimes you don't know how to position the book. You feel that something similar in the past, rep maybe read by us or not read by us, has not done well for publishers because they look at historical data all the time. The moment a publisher receives a submission from a new writer, they'll just Google the person, see if they've published anything on Amazon, if it's self-published or not, and if the person has published it, they'll track down the sales figures for the book. So it is commerce at the end of the day. So it's not because we are being rude or we don't care about your submission. It's that we have not been able to arrive at a decision.
Also, just a tangent, because I know you mentioned you've had a lot of feedback from a lot of different places, and it's maybe making you feel a bit frozen. Forget about it. Like anything that doesn't resonate. And this is not my general advice for when you're working with an editor, but I do say, like, your author, as an author, you know the book best, right? So even when you have a professional editor at a publishing house, I always tell my authors, don't accept 100% of the edits. Hopefully it's like 80, 90%, but you'll know when you have an instinct about when something isn't right. So if you've got a lot of conflicting feedback and it's making you feel stuck, whatever doesn't chime, forget about it right now and then follow it and stop thinking about what other people are going to think, right? Trust your instinct and get the book written.
On the contrary, if you start getting the similar kind of feedback from multiple readers, then you have to take it seriously.
If 10 people are
Point.
saying the same thing, yes, that's very good.
Ma'am, your question.
I have the mic. I just want to know, as publishers of detective fiction, would you look as enthusiastically at a novel as short stories? Suppose you get something like Jeffrey Archer, 4 brilliant short stories. Would you be clear, or are you hesitant? Does every publisher say, oh no, not short story? Why this bias against short stories?
Short stories don't sell.
Why?
Nor in the UK
Why?
or the US.
If they are brilliant.
It's an interesting question. Why?
Yeah.
I mean, I just have to go back to history. And say even V.S. Naipaul was asked to publish his short stories after he published his first 2 novels.
Jeffrey Archer got success with his novels, and then after that,
At least back then.
Jeffrey Archer got his massive commercial success with his novels.
The short stories
then,
came
when
later.
you
They
become
just don't sell for some
very
strange
famous,
reason.
which is kind of inexplicable because
If you have a platform already, you've got a really large audience, then a publisher can publish it because people will buy it. But we do struggle if there isn't already a platform to get readers to connect with it. In the UK, we started doing some. I'm using my theatre voice. We started doing anthologies occasionally, and it'll be a collection of best-selling authors doing short stories around Christmas or winter, and it's got a theme, and that still works, but it's because it's got all those big names attached to it. So it's a really great question, and I wish I knew more of why readers weren't buying it in the same way, but it's a commercial thing.
I think it's in India, short stories are as hard to sell as poetry. It's that bad. I take on 1 or 2 collections every year. They have to be outstanding. They have to have a very strong thematic coherence, and like Leodora said, anthologies sell well. So some of Alep's best-selling books are those series, the greatest short stories in Bangla, the greatest short stories in Punjabi. So they sell like 15,000-20,000 copies, sometimes more. They've published an anthology of short stories by new writers, which has sold a lot. So there has to be a sort of a hook, and also like if you keep publishing in a certain genre, and even if you don't get immediate success, I think the readers are going to take those books and that genre more seriously, which is what is lacking in crime writing in India. That publishers give up after doing 1 or 2 books by a crime writer, if whether or not it's a series or standalone. So I don't blame them because it's no longer feasible for them because the books are not selling. 500 copies, 600 copies, 1000 copies, even if the like reviews in Indian Express, Mint, everything. I mean, I don't know what's going to change this, so. And yeah, and also like if you look at the list of Sahitya Academy Award winners every year, most of the winners are writing short stories or poetry. But I don't think it works.
I mean, as readers, we would expect you to ask yourself, how many short story collections have you bought, in English, right, originally? That would actually tell us something.
Is it not just about the expectation of the readers from the novel or the book that they are getting hold on? We want a longer attention or a longer story rather than a short story. Short story might be for a very short time. Maybe I'm traveling in a train and
But
I want to
harder
read
to
something.
write a short story than a
Well,
good
one-
collection of stories.
Sorry, go ahead. No, one perspective, and I don't know if I'm at all right in saying this, but in my limited reading of regional language fiction writing, there's a lot of talent in short story writing. Look at Kannada, certainly. Tamil, for sure. Good, talented writers write short stories. I think somehow short story writing, Indian writers in English, short story writing requires a very different skill set compared to a novel writing. It's a very disciplined art. And I think maybe lots of Indian writers don't get it. That could also be it. I'm not sure whether that's correct. But regional language, I think writers have, they're masters of the short story. That could also be that. I don't know. Just
And also
speculation.
short stories are not eligible for many of the big prizes. I mean, Interpreter of Maladies became massive, because Jhumpa won the Pulitzer Prize for the book. Heart Lamp has sold 140,000 copies because it's international book. They are open to short story submissions. So
And
again,
that's it.
it comes down to the validation.
She wrote in Kannada, you see. I mean, Balu Mushtaq.
I know.
So she had that grip.
No, but had she not won the book would have not sold more than 500 copies in English.
Kannada, as the gentleman rightly said, we get good traction in regional.
That's it. Apart from, say, R.K. Narayan, who, of course, is a great short story writer, if you remember Manohar Malgaonkar, he used to write some terrific short stories in English, right? I wonder if he can recapture some of that magic. Perhaps, if you go back to him and figure out how he wrote his stories, maybe there's a clue there. He wrote novels too. No, but since we are on the subject of the short story, I'm just talking about his short stories.
Good evening. May I please know what are the gray areas in crime writing henceforth and now?
What are the
Gray areas in writing crime.
gray as in?
Gray areas, gray issues.
What do you mean by gray areas?
New place which are not explored.
I mean, every
Like
crime
maybe-
is new, isn't
maybe-
it?
pardon?
Every crime is a new kind
No.
of crime. So
Yeah, that's
the
true, but-
detection of it is therefore.
Suppose an atheist is writing as a protagonist, or a protagonist who is an astrologer.
No, but there has been a astrologer protagonist in Manjari Prabhu's Astral
I'm
Alibi.
just giving an example. No, these are the areas which do you feel, writers, publishers, editors, and readers, do you feel there is an area which still has not been touched? This big congregation of experienced readers, writers, editors.
AI detective, I guess. Conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lady in there.
I think you guys covered most of the questions or of how to write a bestseller. But one point that stood out was make your research deep. Now, what are the steps that me as a newbie writer can do? For example, do I talk to the right cops? Do I talk to the right forensic people who give the right details to make it more authentic and to ensure that I'm not just fibbing or not just writing things out of thin air? What are the steps I can do to make my research deep?
There's a hell of a lot on the net now. I think certainly speaking for myself, AI for fact checking with some care. I mean, I'm not saying you should take what it says literally, it makes mistakes. But there is a lot of stuff out there that was not available 10, 15 years ago. Or you had to trawl the net in a very painful way. There's a lot. I mean, but that's one aspect. But personally speaking, I like to seek out sources. That takes a little time, but it's worth the effort because you get very, very nuanced information that informs your thriller or your book by meeting people on the ground. I mean, that's always my preferred option. Not easy to get access, but you must force it. It's possible. That's what I feel.
I'd say spend some time thinking about your questions. Be careful about your questions when you're meeting the right people. And I'd also say spend the time that you're with that person listening carefully. I think that would make a hell of a lot of a difference. Don't just move on. You have this list of questions, you're going one from the other. Spend time listening to what that person is saying because that's where I think a lot of the things will be, addressed.
I mean, it's already been brilliantly said. Speaking to the right people in the right way, absolutely. A lot of my authors would go out and talk to lawyers if they're writing a specific kind of courtroom legal thriller scene, or speak to police detectives. But I think it's important to ask yourself, like, what are the most important things in my story to get right? Right. So yes, it might be the procedural elements, but there are also going to be emotional elements, potentially cultural elements that are also important. And sometimes those are the areas that sometimes people forget about. I mean, even in my own book, I spent a lot of time talking to therapists because there's quite a lot of therapy in the book, but looking at generational trauma and how that impacts our minds and how it impacts our choices, and doing some deep research on that. So yeah, identifying what it is first and foremost and being really specific about that is important because it means you can then be really focused and then your story will feel less, will resonate the way you want it to.
It's got a lot to do with the kind of story you're writing and your credibility in case you're looking for access, whether it's, in the archives or to people. And you should not hesitate in reaching out to people for help, to connect you to the right people. Because sometimes it's all about connections, and sometimes you find one person who'll connect you to everyone, who is important for research for your story. So keep trying, and if you don't yet have the credibility to, reach out to anyone, or everyone who's important for research for your story, seek help from people who have that credibility.
Just an illustrative point, you don't know where these sources come from. So in my second novel, when researching Akbar, you get a lot of information from the books and the net on Akbar is written about extensively. But at Sikandra in the tomb of Akbar, I met a gentleman, old gentleman, and we were talking. And then he was knowledgeable in his own way. Then he took me to a field about 10 kilometers from Sikandra. And he said, listen to the women. And the women were harvesting or cutting paddy. That's what I remember. And they were all bending and they were singing. All of them. So he said, listen to the song. I couldn't make out anything. He said, they are singing about Akbar. Because he left behind in Uttar Pradesh this settled land revenue because of Todar Mal, his minister, which brought a lot of prosperity, and this, exploitation of the peasant was brought to an end. So for 500 years later, 450 years later, the women harvesting paddy near Sikandra were singing about Akbar. So I got him to translate. It's amazing what came out of the song that they sang about him. That's nothing you will get in a textbook. Impossible. And that informs a little bit of the psychological portrait of Akbar as he behaves in the field. Yeah. So you never know. You must treat it as an adventure. Go look for people. Many things can happen.
Okay, great.
Hi. I'm not sure whether mine is a question or just an observation. I thought it was ironic that we were talking about how short stories in crime fiction don't do well, when some of the greatest short stories in crime fiction is written by Doyle, or the world's greatest consulting detective, barring the Mazarin Stone, which is embarrassing. So my question is, does it take more talent to write a short, compelling, sharp detective short story? And is it just the lack of talent that's making it less popular? Because I mean, Doyle was brilliant, we all know. So that's my question. Is it talent, or is it really that people don't want to read short? Because I love short stories. And I have two shelves of short stories of all sorts. So that's it. I mean,
Why don't you start a YouTube channel promoting short stories? I mean, we need those influencers, for these genres that are not selling. I've been telling one of my authors, who's also a critic, Tanut Solanki, that why don't you do a YouTube channel and recommend books, to do a weekly thing or a monthly thing. I mean, it's again, it boils down to discoverability, and many a times people are not even aware about these books, and they. Writers published internationally become the default choice for readers, because especially young readers, because they are now connected globally, they know what's selling well globally, they would want to read that. So it's not because of lack of talent or uh, you know no craft. I think it's the genre is just not selling.
I do think it is.
Short stories in genre is even tougher.
It's very true. I mean, I would just agree. I don't necessarily think it's a lack of talent. I think it's a very different skill set. But I also think it's a very different experience. And I think there's something to be said for diving into a story that's brilliantly, tightly encapsulated and being transformed for a moment, or made to be. Or being proposed a provocative question, right? Which a lot of short stories do brilliantly. But there's a totally different experience in getting really lost into a character's world for hours and hours and hours and hours, and getting a bit much deeper into like their life, their story, and their world. I think there is a tendency for people to want that depth of escapism, right? Because a short story, depending on length, you might sit and be able to read it in 20 minutes. And if you're really looking for an escape from the horrors of what's going on elsewhere, sometimes you really want to disappear somewhere for at least an hour. And it's harder to do that in a shorter form. So that's not a definite answer to why not everyone loves short stories to the same degree. But I do think they offer a different experience. And that's just why people connect with them in a slightly different
I agree.
way.
And I think that's also why poetry isn't as popular. I think it's demanding in a very different way. And I think people are not, they want to get lost in like a, 200-page novel and be more involved with the characters. And I think it is difficult. And I always thought, is it because of our education system in India? I had no idea it was short stories were not as popular in the UK, but we don't grow up, right, with that poetry, or, I mean, like in my school might be just, but with short stories or poetry, that was not part of what we grew up with. And I think that is why it's sort of like almost like a learned habit, I think. Yeah.
Also, there's a lot of sometimes when uh, an editor in a publishing house enjoys a collection of stories, they sometimes, request the author or their agent to get the author to uh, turn it into a novel, and sometimes that forced attempt to, make the characters or the storylines interconnected, uh, with the characters reappearing, actually works against the book. It's not, as a whole, and I have seen this many times when I, at the insistence of the editor in editors in publishing houses, I got my authors to uh, turn their, standalone short stories into interconnected stories. So
Sometimes a lot of collections are so uneven, Yeah. Yes.
Is there an element of fatigue when it comes to crime in India? Because you're exposed to so much of crime reports in press, in visual media, YouTube. There's also a lot of political tints that are given to every crime. So is that something that sets off interest in Indian crime writing as opposed to Western? Because any Western crime fiction is exotic. It's something that's somehow disconnected from you. You can sit at home and read a British or a Scandinavian mystery and you don't feel like it's very close or it's very familiar, whereas an Indian crime story, you sort of know that, okay, it's only the cops who will actually realistically investigate crimes in India. There aren't really any private investigators like Sherlock Holmes or Poirot. So is that something that sets the industry back, the genre back?
I don't think so. Look at OTT, right? You have so many programs that are so popular on Netflix that are police procedurals or like detectives, and so I don't think that's what it is, because I think the Indian audience really enjoys reading crime, but I can't figure out why it is that crime writing is a bit of a difficulty.
I, there's a question here.
Sorry.
Oh, there's a question, then it'll come to you.
Yeah. When you're writing about non-fiction and crime, how much of a risk is a publisher, the publisher's agent, and the author in terms of libel and lawsuits? And what do you advise for authors who are writing about true crime, and how can they get themselves covered?
I think it's becoming worse. Let me put it that way. I think, there is an atmosphere where there is some fear or there is some apprehension. I wouldn't say fear, there is apprehension because of what's been happening. And so, that has become a factor, right? It's there. How much, etc., is difficult to quantify, but it's there. It wasn't there that much some years ago.
So for non-fiction crime writing, I would first and foremost look at the credibility of the writer. Sometimes these books are being done by seasoned journalists who have been reporting on a certain beat for many years. So obviously, there is an implicit trust and faith in them and in their research, and but no matter how much information and footnotes and evidence you have, the uh, the publisher can be taken to court for the most frivolous of reasons. This happened with one of my authors, Murzaban Shroff, who did a collection of short stories called Breathless in Bombay, and he was taken to court for the use of the word ghati in a very non-offensive context, and then that case went on and on for many years. He lost so much money. His career got derailed. Breathless in Bombay was published in the UK, US, India. It was a big bestseller, and then he decided to self-publish his second book. So it really, at the most, we can just make sure that the fact checking is done and multiple legal reads are done. Because if it's a true crime, then publishers get multiple legal reads done. So it's, we can just do our due diligence.
And just quickly add, I don't know if it's different in the UK, but certainly on the fiction side, it's written into the contract that the author is legally liable. So the agent certainly isn't that concerned about it. The publisher can get publicly disgraced, but it's the author who'd be sued. So it really is usually in legal writing that it's up to the author to do the due diligence to make sure they won't get in trouble, unfortunately.
But publishing contracts are very different from other contracts. So even though, I'm talking from the Indian perspective, even though it mentions that, that the author will be liable if there is some breach, in all cases that I've seen where, the author has been slapped with a legal notice, it's the publisher and their team who are supporting the authors, So it's, so which is why publishing contracts and publishing in general works on trust,
I just have a small observation. You may want to react to that. In the visual storytelling world, there has been, because there is so much talk about short stories, there has been a huge shift in last 2-3 years towards these micro dramas, where you have stories in 2 minutes, and now it is kind of, at least everyone is investing in it in India. China, it became a huge thing, and now every investment that you see in the world of movies and studios, people are investing in micro dramas. So maybe it is also about the way of consumption. Like if I'm traveling, like I used to see in Mumbai, if you travel by train, people would be watching serials or even comedy shows while they are standing in the train. If I have to, if I am traveling and I want to read something on my phone, I prefer a small read at that time. So I'm just saying there is a shift in another form of storytelling. Maybe in reading, something could be taken from that.
Already on platforms like AO3 and Wattpad, internationally, sort of episodic, chapter by chapter storytelling has been really, really popular, usually with a much, much younger audience. I wouldn't be surprised, we've been talking about it in publishing in the UK at the very least, if in the future we do move to a more episodic form of story story reading. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be massive, and I can't see it shifting anytime soon. But I do think it's a really interesting thing to flag. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I wanted to ask the panel, particularly you guys, where is the audio book in India going? It's still very small, or it's grown, or
No. How is it doing well?
It's not doing well, but it is growing much more than Kindle.
growing faster than Kindle, the audio book.
No, Audible has cut down acquisitions as far as I know. Storytel.
Penguin hasn't.
No, but listen, no. But Storytel came into the market with so much Indian market with so much fanfare, and not only were they like signing left, right, and center, they were also allocating a budget for the authors. Imagine allocating a budget of 1 lakh for a Shobha Day collection of stories, and she did not know what to do with that budget. How is she going to use that money for promotions? And now, if you look at them, they are only doing bestsellers in a few markets. So as far as I know, and Penguin and Harper, yes, they are kind of bullish in audio, but haven't you started doing your own audiobooks like Manu?
Because, and they're circumspect on which books they're converting to audio. But it is certainly growing because they have the statistics.
That's the sense.
And it is
Silently creeping up on your answer. Yeah, so we've come to the end of the first edition of Dead Right. So I think it was a very successful 2 days. So thank you all for being here and making it happen. Please do follow us on socials for any or all information regarding everything Bangalore Literature Festival. The main event that happens usually at the end of the year is happening in December. So please do come, and up until then, continue reading. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.